station at Reading, Pennsylvania. And if someone who was, there were slave hunters or some law enforcement officer would intercept that message, and they would think that they were going to the the main train station. But so they would go there and wait. But then, if the word via was in there, that meant they were going to the station at Reading, the town of Reading, Pennsylvania, and so they would arrive and be taken to a safe place. The Underground Railroad was very secretive, and so it's difficult to get stories. Often people didn't ever tell about who had helped them along the way, or probably they didn't even know. But we've found a couple from Marshall County that are in some of the history books, and or some historians have written about. And one of the stories about Albert Barrett again was that his steam engine didn't have power enough to operate both of his mills at the same time. So he has set up a schedule where his sons would operate the sawmill during the day, and he would operate the grist mill at night. He was always helped by a Negro named Ruth, and he was a large man. And his historian wrote, "These were perilous times as bleeding Kansas attempted to gain statehood. There was bloodshed as roving bands of guerrillas ravaged the countryside in their attempts to bring Kansas into the Union as a free or slave state." Now, as Beth said, we don't know of any bloodshed that happened in Marshall County, but this may have been close. One night, as Barrett was operating his grist mill with his helper, he went down to stoke the boiler fire and was seized, bound, and gagged by guerrillas. As he was about to be tossed into the blazing furnace, Ruth came to his rescue with a stick of cordwood and saved his life. No one was safe in those days, not even a miller or a lumber merchant. And here's a story about a man from, also from that area. He lived on the Vermilion River near Barrett, and he was also an ardent abolitionist. And he had been appointed Justice of the Peace, which was a judge of sorts, in that area around Vermilion. But the fugitive slave, the laws of the territory actually had been passed by a pro-slavery legislature, and it required that officers, when they were sworn in, they had to swear to an ironclad oath, and it provided, among other things, that the provisions of the United States, the fugitive slave law, were in effect. So they would have to turn in any slave that they found. And so he couldn't bring himself to take that oath. So he asked his friend to intercede for him with the judge, who was a federal judge who came out to administer the oath. And so he did, and luckily the judge was from Pennsylvania, which was a free state. So the judge just rewrote the oath so he didn't have to swear to turn the slaves in. And he was sworn in, and he was able to use his office then to help the slaves, because sometimes they were dragged into court. Or probably the people who would help them were dragged into court. Well, I'm from the newspaper, and I have a few newspaper stories, but if we have time at the end, I'll tell you a little bit about what it was like to be in the newspaper in those days.
And they publish everything in the newspaper. I love reading old newspapers. When the Act of April 1861 was proclaimed, they asked for 75,000 militia for a 3-month period. Kansas sent 650 men, which was the least of all 21 states that responded. The largest number that were recruited in Kansas was in July 1863, after the Battle of Bull Run, when 6,953 responded. Kansas sent 12,077 soldiers to the Civil War. Marshall County furnished 431 men. 431 men doesn't sound like a whole lot. Well, listen, there were only 450 men who were over age 21 and therefore eligible to join up. So out of that number, 431 is a pretty good turnout, don't you think? I get to tell you the story, a love story a war story, one of the best and the best documented that we have in Marshall County. And that is about Charles B. Hazlitt. Charles and his wife and his 2-year-old son and baby daughter came to Vermilion Township in 1860. Following that, he lost his wife and a new baby in childbirth and also lost the baby that they had brought with him. He decided he would enlist in the Kansas Volunteer Infantry. They were paying cash, he needed the money. He left, and he and his friend Harvey Randall, remember that name too, Harvey Randall, enlisted together. And he left his 3-year-old boy with Harvey's wife, Melissa. Remember Melissa's name too. Oh good, I didn't punch my button. I just got an extra 30 seconds. His regiment didn't get sent down to the south to the Civil War, but up to Fort Kearney, Nebraska. And Randall got seriously ill up there and died. Well, as best friend, Hazlitt had to write the letters home to his wife. And so he sent 3 of them, all basically saying the same thing about his losing your husband and where do you want the money sent. And he goes into description. We have the diary of this gentleman, his information about him that's in Marysville. You can look it up and read more because there's a lot there. But he sends a sympathy letter to her, tells her how the burial service went, and says that it reminds me of losing my wife. We must bear these misfortunes and trust in God, and closes with, I cannot write anymore. I'm going to enclose a lock of his hair in the envelope. So he sent the widow a lock of her husband's hair. In 1863, Hazlitt went to the Battle of Chickamauga, which if you read about them, that's a major war. Can you open my water for me? Chickamauga, there were 19,000 dead and wounded Union soldiers there. Hazlitt was like a nurse there, and the Confederates captured the whole bunch of them, the wounded people as well as all the doctors and medical personnel, and were going to hold them captive. But the North sent ambulances down to pick up the wounded, so they got out of there. The rest of all these people were sent to prisoner of war camps, Confederate camps. And the first one they stayed in was Atlanta, which was an open board pen, and it had no shelter from the frosty weather because this was getting cold. In Richmond prison, they were searched and their money taken. Now that would have meant as a prisoner that you had no money to buy food if anybody came by with anything to sell, or to buy a piece of clothing if somebody had something extra. You had no money, no knives or anything to trade for something that you might need just to survive. Rations were 2 times a day. You got 1/4 of a loaf of bread and 1 ounce of beef. Heads up, Lane. Don't eat it, but take a look. That's what you're going to get twice a day. And you think, okay, that's not too bad, I can live on that, right? But the thing of it is, this is day after boring day. But once in a while you get a break. You get a pint of watery soup, 3 beans boiled in some water. Or you might get a 3-inch square cornbread, which is not very big, and some rotten bacon. The guards weren't eating much better. In November, they were moved again by railroad. They were searched for the 3rd time, so anything they managed to accumulate, steal, or take off of a dead body, they no longer had that to use to trade, to get something else. Rations were poured in none. The weather was cold. The men had little clothes. Our man Hazlitt got what was called rheumatism and ended up in the hospital. He was delighted. He had a straw mattress and good covers. And once he was physically able to get up and stomp around with the use of a cane, he discovered where the kitchen was dumping the trash, all right? The kitchen was dumping the leftovers. He found the potato peels weren't too bad, and he started eating, he started eating potato peels. And it filled him up. He was glad. He was very sad to find out he was going to have to go back to the regular prison part, because that would mean that he couldn't get to these vegetables that he'd been eating. In May of 1864, the 235th day that he'd been eating this kind of stuff and surviving horrible conditions, he was moved to the worst prison in the history of this war, and that's Andersonville. There's a book called Andersonville. I recommend it. It's good long reading, and it's got the details. 30,000 of the northern prisoners were crowded into an area about the size of 16 football fields. Now that sounds kind of big, but that means 2,000 people for each acre, 2,000 people on a piece of land the size of a football field. Trust me, there was no grass growing, it would have been eaten. A bucket of corn mush mixed with spoiled bacon fed 90 men. There was no shelter from the heat. Hazlitt's teeth got loose. That's scurvy from not having vitamin C. And when he was given a ration of cornbread, it was so hard he couldn't eat it. He traded it for the beans that he could kind of mash up and get in. He saw men who had lost their eyesight beg to be killed. He saw men who were being eaten alive by maggots and rats beg to be shot by the guards. And the guards did. Here's the good part. Hazlitt survived after 12 to 14 months in prison under these conditions. He was discharged late in 1864. He returned to Marshall County. Anybody got the punchline figured out? Come on, girls. What's he gonna do? Who's he gonna marry? The wife of his good friend that went to Nebraska with him. They had more children. Marysville's got pictures of it. Actually, I've got a picture of him here, Matt. If you want to get that, you can pass that too. That's Hazlitt and his wife Melissa and their children. He's buried west of the Leeds in a small cemetery by both of his wives and the babies from both of the marriages. A really strong tie to Abraham Lincoln comes from the two Adams brothers, and they were around the Waterville area. One ran the newspaper, and another one was in the Frontier Guards. They probably are people from our area that actually touched Lincoln's hand. And since we're celebrating him today, I think you need to know that. And it's just kind of cool. Franklin G. Adams was the newspaper man, and he set up the Methodist Church as a meeting place for Lincoln to speak when he came to Atchison, Kansas. And he was a politician, so he would have been in there greeting Mr. President and shaking his hand and visiting with him about how the country was going. And the other one, his brother Henry J., signed up for the Frontier Guards, which was kind of an unofficial military group. And they ended up actually living in the White House, guarding President Lincoln and his family as the war started escalating and Lincoln's life was in danger. And they were Kansas men, and I think it's obvious that Lincoln trusted people from Kansas, as well he should. You're next.
I'm next?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, my name is Lloyd Chupkegel, and I live in Marysville. I'm a volunteer with the Marshall County Historical Society, but my real interest is cemeteries of Marshall County. And for many years, I have helped clean up the small cemeteries and reset stones and do many things to try to make the cemeteries survive. Well, folks are all talking about the Civil War and soldiers. One experience that I know of personally, my great-grandfather, his name was Elias Schreiner. He was born in Darmstadt, Germany, and came to the United States when he was 10 years old in 1836. He married a lady by the name of Mary Harms in Wisconsin in 1855. They had a couple kids already, or three maybe. By the time the war came along, he decided that because they were paying good money and he, I suppose, was bored, he joined the Civil War. But he only served about 5 months before he was severely injured and discharged. He came back to Wisconsin eventually to Kansas in 1865. They settled south of Frankfort, approximately 6 to 7 miles south of Frankfort, and his daughter, Lena Schreiner, was born approximately 1860, and she became a nurse. Well, eventually, there was no nursing homes, so she made a deal with my parents, who were married in 1915, to, she had inherited a quarter section of land there south of Frankfort. She made a deal with the folks that she would sell the land to them for very little if when she retired she could come to live with us. Well, I can never remember when she didn't live with us up until her death in 1953. She used to tell stories of her dad, who was not a big man at all. He carried a large, oh, by the way, he had 11 daughters and 4 boys, and eventually had 2,000 acres of land. But being a veteran, and there was no towns. Frankfort hadn't even been established yet, but there was a little tiny village called LaGrange, about 7 miles south of Frankfort. All it was a little post office, a little store, more or less, and a school. Well, every fall, Great Grandpa would hitch up 3 or 4 wagons with some neighbors with their oxen and drive 90 miles to Atchison to get supplies for this little store for themselves. They would take the mail that had been left there back to Atchison so it could be distributed elsewhere. And eventually he died in 1918 and is buried in LaGrange, or Mount Hope as they call it now, cemetery about 6 miles south of Frankfort. And I hope to God I never have to straighten his stone. The top of the stone comes to my hat, and there's a ball that big around on the top of it. How in the world they got all that? My dad said they put 6.5 foot of crushed rock under this stone to keep it level. And to this day, it's as level as you could put a level on there. It's not tipped in any direction. Another example, like the folks are saying, there's not many people in Kansas eligible to go to the Civil War. But one man that was, name was Ebenezer Mills. He married a lady by the name of Caroline Barks in Ohio. In 1856, he joined up with several others that decided to come to Kansas. First they got to approximately where Barrett is, which is about 3 miles, a little south and mostly west of Frankfort. They spread out, and he picked a place about 6 miles south of Frankfort, built a small cabin, and his wife was not yet 17, but had a child of 1 year. She was heavily pregnant with another child. They had no livestock other than